Hello, I see a lot of new faces out there, so welcome. And I hope that I have something to teach you today. I know there's a lot of questions surrounding nutrition and HO, what's the best way to go? And I'm mainly going to share with you what I have learned from my own experience taking care of my son and, some of the clients that I've had the privilege to see since then. So the big question is weight loss possible with a diagnosis of hypothalamic obesity? So this is a picture of my son. It was taken a couple of years apart, but the answer is yes, it is possible. So successful treatment of HO and hyperphagia will likely require a multi-prong approach that addresses the following 6 items, and I have highlighted 3 of them because those are the 3 that we can address partially through nutrition and exercise. So we want to address the hyperphagia, the decreased energy expenditure, otherwise known as metabolism, hyperinsulinemia, high insulin levels that we get from damage to the hypothalamus. Optimizing hormone replacement is going to be key. Addressing sleep disturbance, as Dr. Sengupta suggested, taking care of those night munchies and just disrupting metabolism, and psychosocial disorders. So going in order, how do we address hyperphagia through nutrition? And the key things that I have found to be helpful are keeping added sugar intake extremely low. When I say added sugar, I am not talking about fruits necessarily, although we do want to limit those somewhat, but I'm talking about table sugar, sucrose. It is added to most foods in the United States, unless it's something that is a nature-made food. So sticking to mostly nature-made food, and I'm going to go over in detail what I mean by that. Eating lots of non-starchy vegetables. So these are going to be your crunchy vegetables, and you can cook them and make them non-crunchy. But as long as they're starting out crunchy, that's going to be, your peppers, your broccoli, kale, things like that. I'll give more examples. Eating 5 to 6 times a day is really helpful with hyperphagia, especially with a child. It's very, very hard, to tell anybody who's feeling hungry all the time and thinking about food all the time that they can't eat, or that they need to eat 3 times a day. So I find that eating 5 to 6 scheduled, so 3 meals and 2 snacks scheduled every single day, is very, very helpful. And then limiting carbohydrates, not including, again, those crunchy, non-starchy vegetables, to about half a cup each time you eat is ideal. Now, ideal is not always the same thing as what's reasonable and what works for you or your child, but that's the sort of what we're shooting for. How do we address low metabolism? Through exercise is going to be building muscle mass. So, muscle takes a lot more energy for your body to maintain while you're at rest. So although cardio is important and you should be doing cardio, I think it's extremely important and helpful to do muscle building exercise at least 30 minutes twice a week. And some examples are going to be weights, water aerobics, yoga, and Pilates. How do we address high insulin levels through diet? So again, limiting those carbohydrates to roughly half a cup at each meal and each snack. And when you're looking at food labels, if you are eating human-made food, you want to look for food that has less than 5 grams of added sugar per serving. Now, I know in some countries, I think in Canada, they don't necessarily always add the added sugar to the nutrition label. So then you're going to have to really look at the ingredients, and I'll go into that. Eating mostly nature-made food. Do not keep human-made food in the home. So the less human-made food you can keep in the home, and just to give you a hint, anything that you cannot make in your own kitchen by yourself is considered human-made. Now, I like to preface that with saying, if you couldn't make it in, let's say you were the average housewife in the 1700s, people back then made their own sausage, they made their own yogurt, they milked their own cows, they made their own cheese. So I do consider those to be nature-made, minimally processed. Of course, building muscle mass is also going to help with those insulin levels because it's going to help your insulin work better. And then weight loss, if possible, is going to help with those insulin levels as well. So why does some carbohydrate restriction work for hypothalamic obesity? You know, and this is my my guess, my hypothesis. We know that patients with HO have chronic high insulin levels due not only to damage to the hypothalamus or the hypothalamic syndrome, but also due to just being overweight, which of no fault of their own, and of eating mostly human-made high sugar foods. So we know that chronic high insulin levels make weight loss difficult because it's an anabolic hormone. So what that means is it tells your body, go into storage mode. So when you eat a very high carbohydrate load at a meal or a lot of sugar at a meal, insulin is produced, and then it tells your body, store that sugar in the muscles, store that sugar in the liver, store that extra sugar, turn it into fat and store it into fat stores. So it's hard to lose weight when your body's in storage mode. So it makes sense to me that minimizing insulin secretion by limiting carbohydrates and sugar can or may facilitate weight loss in individuals with hypothalamic obesity. So for those of you who don't know, what is insulin? Insulin is a hormone that's produced by your pancreas, and I like to think of it as a key. And I like to think of two different compartments. You've got the blood compartment and you've got inside your cells. So insulin is just a key that, so when you eat food, your body turns it into a very simple form of sugar called glucose. And then that glucose goes into your blood. And your blood is only happy when it has a limited range of sugar in the blood. If there's too little, you feel sick. It's dangerous. If there's too much, it can cause damage over long term. And I almost think of it, your blood is getting syrupy, you know, thick and syrupy. It has trouble flowing to the peripheral parts of your body. So insulin is a key that opens the door that lets the blood out of, lets the sugar out of the blood and lets it go into the cells where we want it to be, because then your cells can decide, do we burn this for energy? Do we store it for later? So again, it puts your body into storage mode, insulin, so which is why we want to minimize those levels through diet. So I want to simplify nutrition for you. It's gotten so complex, and it really doesn't have to be. When you are looking at a food in a restaurant, at home, in a grocery store, just ask yourself this question: who created this food? And there's two answers. Either Mother Nature made it or human beings made it in a factory. So if Mother Nature made it, it is healthy and you can eat it. I don't care how much fat's in it. I don't care how much salt's in it. I don't care what, the percentage of anything is in it. Yes, it's a healthy food. It falls into that category. It falls into the category of food that you should be keeping in your home. If the answer is human beings made this food, I couldn't make this in my kitchen. I can't make Cheetos in my kitchen. I don't know how they did that. That's not a food that you want to keep in the house. Now, I think that there is room for everything, and there's sort of a, it's a longer talk to go into how much, and should I with HO, should I with hyperphagia. But, I think there's always space to be able to eat some of these human-made foods outside of the home, but inside the home, we want to stick to mostly nature-made food as much as possible. So just examples of this nature-made unprocessed food: again, plain whole milk yogurt, cheese, whole milk, fruits, vegetables, meats, anything that comes from a plant or an animal. If it's been untouched by humans, that's best. But again, the minimally processed, meaning cheese, whole milk yogurt, sausage, bacon, eggs, these are all things, eggs would fall into the untouched, but the bacon and the sausage would fall into sort of that minimally processed. These are all foods that it is a-okay to eat. So I just put a list here of nature-made food. So again, these are all coming from plants and animals. So these are the gold standard of foods that you can and should eat. I like to think of these non-starchy vegetables as the low-carb carbohydrate, and that's why I tend to separate them out from when I talk about carbohydrates. I put these non-starchy vegetables in a different category. I think they can and should be eaten at every meal or snack. They can even be eaten between meals and snacks if you have hyperphagia. If your child has hyperphagia and they cannot, they're staring at the clock, they can't wait to get to the next meal or snack, rather than fight with them and waste all your energy trying to distract them, you can offer them non-starchy vegetables. I don't care if they're cooked. I don't care if they're raw. You can even use butter, salt, cheese, full fat, low sugar salad dressing. When I say low sugar, I do not mean artificially sweetened. I just mean naturally low in sugar salad dressing, to make these non-starchy vegetables more delicious and more exciting. But they're perfectly fine, and my son ate a ton, pounds and pounds of them a day. I realize there are people and children out there that do not like them, and it does present extra challenges. So these foods are high in fiber, they help you stay full, and they're high in phytochemicals, antioxidants, which decrease inflammation, prevent all kinds of diseases, and then of course high in potassium and magnesium, which helps lower blood pressure. So I almost think of non-starchy vegetables as a medicine. They really are. So we want to eat plenty of animal protein. So our plate, we want to have mostly non-starchy vegetables on the plate. After that, we want to see animal protein. Yes, you know, there is room to be a vegetarian or a vegan, but I'm a big proponent of animal protein. So if you are a vegetarian or vegan and you're doing it for health reasons, I would encourage you, you know, to start including some animal protein in your diet. It doesn't have any carbohydrate at all. Therefore, it's not really stimulating very much insulin at all. It's filling. It usually contains some form of fat, whether healthy or unhealthy. Fat delays gastric emptying, so that means that it is slowing the rate that food leaves your stomach. So food stays in your stomach longer when you eat fat. So you stay full longer even with hyperphagia, in my experience. And that may not be true for everybody, but I have seen it be true for enough for me to be able to say that. It also stimulates glucagon secretion, which is a catabolic hormone that antagonizes insulin. So that's more of a theoretical thing in my head, but I think it's interesting, and I think that you know, it does the opposite, glucagon of storage, meaning it tells your body to start breaking down the stored fat, the stored carbohydrate, and burn it for energy. And again, I mentioned that it contains fat. So please do not fear dietary fat. So, you know, fat is satisfying. We want meals to taste good. We want them to be satisfying. We don't want you to feel like you're dieting or depriving yourself. And if you're going to focus your energy on limiting something, I want you to focus it on limiting human-made carbohydrates, nature-made carbohydrates to some extent, and sugar. But carbohydrates and sugar is where I want you to put your energy at limiting, not the fat. The fat is not the problem here. Fat stimulates little, if any, insulin secretion. Again, it helps you feel full. Of course, healthy fat is preferable over saturated fat, but honestly, in terms of weight loss, it doesn't really matter. I say do both. You know, we eat avocado and nuts and seeds several times a day. I use olive oil on everything, but I also use butter. I also serve red meat a couple times a week. So, you know, there's that. And if you're eating a low-fat meal, I highly recommend that you add at least a teaspoon to a tablespoon of healthy fat to your meal, whether it's olive oil or olives or nuts or seeds or even, you know, bacon or even mayonnaise, salad dressing. So limiting carbohydrates to about half a cup a day. So I wanted to talk about these nature-made carbohydrates that we do want to see you serving. We do want to see you eating. Wild rice, brown rice, quinoa, potatoes, winter squash, corn, peas, beans, edamame. Take a picture of the slide. I'm getting low on time. I wanted to make my own hyperphagia HO food guide pyramid. So this is, again, the way that I'd love to see a plate structured. Most of your plate should be non-starchy vegetables, then protein, then fat, and the smallest part of your plate should be these energy-dense carbohydrates and sugar. So that includes both human and nature-made carbohydrates. So if you want to take a picture of this one, these are things that I keep in my pantry at all times. Animal protein, nuts, nut butter, make sure it doesn't have sugar added. Make sure that your deli meat doesn't have sugar added to it if possible. Sometimes I buy turkey that has a little bit of honey in it. You know, if you have a really picky child and they'll only eat, you know, a little bit of honey turkey rather than fresh roasted turkey, that's fine. You can get away with that. I'm more concerned about limiting the human-made food. We do a lot of pumpkin seeds, sunflower seeds, non-starchy vegetables. Popcorn is a great nature-made carbohydrate because you can actually eat 3 cups of it instead of a half a cup because it's expanded and it's very lightweight. Oh, and I didn't mention that was on that slide in terms of yogurt. I only feed my child and myself. We only do whole milk plain yogurt. We don't do low-fat yogurt. It's been processed in a factory. The fat's been removed. Again, I want him to have that fat. I want him to have that delayed gastric emptying to be full for a little bit longer. And then we'll add either fruit or sometimes some like paleo granola or something in there to make it a little bit sweeter. So examples of the human-made ultra-processed food. Again, if you can't make it in your kitchen, don't keep it in the house. What does not work for HO is a low-fat, high-carbohydrate, high-sugar diet, otherwise known as the standard American diet. So why? Because it stimulates excessive amounts of insulin. Insulin increases hunger and food cravings because it makes your blood sugar drop. It puts your body in storage mode. And when you're hungry, then you're really, being less discriminatory about what you're eating. And it puts the body into storage mode. So foods to avoid, again, human-made food, food that lists any form of sugar in the first 4 ingredients. Food labeled as fat-free or low-fat are usually human-made foods that are not real healthy unless they're just naturally that way, like let's say broccoli. Foods containing artificial sweetener, drinks containing artificial sweetener. The only exception is if you have DI and you do not have a thirst mechanism, and the only way you or your child is able to meet their fluid needs is by sweetening their water or their beverage with a little bit of artificial sweetener, or better yet, stevia. That's fine. Meeting those fluid needs are way more important. Keeping your sodium stable is going to be way more important than a little artificial sweetener in your diet. Avoid fruit juice, avoid ketchup, barbecue sauce. They're full of sugar and people tend to eat more when they have them. They tend to trigger cravings. A little milk for your coffee is okay. Whole milk, half and half, but I wouldn't serve it as a beverage, especially with DI. That can get you into trouble. Cereal is usually a bingey kind of food, especially in this patient population. So why is sugar public enemy number 1? It makes it very difficult to stick to appropriate portion sizes, especially in this patient population. Again, with the insulin levels, causes them to spike and plummet, which then can result in hunger. It increases dopamine levels in the brain, which is the feel-good neurotransmitter that just makes you want to keep eating more sugar. I mean, we've all had the experience of eating, a Reese's peanut butter cup or something, and you just feel this kind of like almost minimal sense of ecstasy, like, oh, that's so good. And so people continue to eat that to chase that good feeling. And in my experience, a diet very low in sugar minimizes food cravings. So you can Google a list of words for sugar. I'm not going to spend time on that, but when you're looking at the ingredients, you don't want any of these words in the first 4 ingredients, and it's an easy list to Google. So just to give some snack examples, what does a snack of, purely or mostly nature-made food look like? On the left, I've got blueberries, turkey, cucumbers, and cashews. And then on the right, for picky kids, I find making kebabs and putting a lot of color in there always makes food more appealing. Bento boxes are great because they keep the portion sizes where you want them to be. So on the right, we've got mozzarella cheese and fruit kebabs. And again, I always add vegetables. So I've got vegetable rolls on the side. I bought them at Whole Foods. They're wrapped in rice paper. The between snacks for the severe hyperphagia. When my son was young, it was a lifesaver. I would make noodles out of zucchini with like a spiralizer, and I'd saute them with olive oil and put some Parmesan cheese on top. Here you go. It's a lot of work, yes, but it helps you get through. So I would let him even snack on things that maybe had a little bit of protein in them as well as fat if just the non-starchy vegetables weren't enough for him between meals and snacks, just not extra carb. Dinner examples of a nature-made food. I've got a frittata on the right that's full of non-starchy vegetables. It's also got animal protein in there, cheese and meat. And then for the carb, I've got sweet potato slices. I put a little bit of guacamole on top. I don't measure fat. I don't count it. I don't count my son's fat intake. I don't even think about it. I just make sure there's some fat every single time he eats. And then on the right is a hamburger. Instead of a bun, I've got a sweet potato. You can use buns. Life is hard. Life is hectic. Make sure they're small. Make sure they're whole wheat if possible, and try to limit bread to about 3 times a week, ideally. Worst case scenario, maybe once a day. So every single time you fill up your plate, I want it to have protein, I want it to have fat, and I want it to have fiber. And fiber comes in the form of that nature-made carbohydrate, limited ideally to half a cup, and the non-starchy vegetables, the low-carb carb. So in summary, just going back over everything I said, we want to eat mostly nature-made unprocessed food, avoid human-made food, especially in the house. Outside the house is okay. Once in a while, limit those energy-dense carbs, ideally to half a cup, 5 to 6 times a day. Eat as many non-starchy vegetables as you like, as long as you're not making yourself sick and throwing up or anything like that. Exercise that builds muscle is going to give you the most bang for your buck in terms of metabolism, but cardio is also important. And keeping sugar intake low. In my house, we did dessert once a week, and then maybe 2 or 3 times a week we would do some dark chocolate chips, like a tablespoon, something like that. And just some pictures for cuteness of my boys. Involve your kids in cooking, whether you are the person that has hyperphagia or hypothalamic obesity, or it's your child. If you get them involved in cooking, let them pick recipes, give them some recipes to choose from. So this is my son at an early age, weighing and measuring his food, which, it's good to teach them how much their portion size should look like. You don't have to be religious about weighing and measuring it, just to give them a sense of, okay, this is what it looks like, the portion size you should have, and then they can eyeball it, or you can eyeball it. Again, the kebabs, we did a ton of kebabs. And you can get my book on my website, marcysirota.com, which goes much more into depth about all of this. Thank you very much. But I'm going